All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, the budget workshop session to order. We will begin as always with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And then I would like to say a very brief word about Supervisor Rogers. We'll do a more formal recognition of his service at the September meeting. But if we could all just have a moment of silence for Mike, I think he'd appreciate it. All right, thank you. We have a card for him. Well, Andrew is calling the roll. I will take this down to the end of the board and it can pass along for people who'd like to sign it. If the clerk would call the roll.
Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Patrick Breslin.
Here.
Supervisor Headland.
Here.
Supervisor Score.
Here.
Supervisor Steen.
Here.
Supervisor Zons.
Present.
Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Here.
Supervisor Wilsey.
Here.
Supervisor Quinn. Supervisor Rogers. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Witzel. Supervisor Kinnear. Supervisor Barrier. Supervisor Calabrese. Supervisor Keeter.
I believe he was planning on joining us online.
He's online. Okay. Supervisor Vogel. Supervisor Sean Breslin. Supervisor Vandermeulen. Supervisor Robinson. Supervisor Morehouse. Supervisor Hagan. Supervisor Thomas. Supervisor Prochnow. Supervisor Gilbert.
Here.
Supervisor Larry Bjork. Supervisor Bauer. Supervisor Leno. Supervisor Hartung. Chair McCullough.
Here. All right. Now we move on to the presentation of the 2024 proposed county budget information, and this is where I mostly shut up for a long time. Chris?
All right, good evening. Thank you for taking time out of this beautiful summer evening for this just captivating presentation. Okay, our goal tonight is to give you an overview of our current financial status, and then to take a look at the review of the funding and the requests, the funding available and the requests that we have. And we are you're going to hear some things probably multiple times, just because they kind of come at you in different forms and formats. But and I am going to, through the meeting here, I'm going to start a clipboard around that allows you, it's got a number of times over the next couple of weeks available if you want to come in, one or a couple of you want to come in or whatever, and sit down and ask questions and go over budget information individually, or if you want to meet and have a cup of coffee and do that, or however you want to do that. We can do it virtually or whatever works. I just have some times, and if you need an evening time, just let me know and we'll get that scheduled on there. I think the latest on there are some 4 o'clocks, maybe a couple of 5 o'clocks. So if you need a time later than that, just let me know and we'll figure something out. I think that's all that I have to say. Our goal is to get you out. I'm shooting for 2.5 hours. So we're going to go with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Beata, who's going to walk you through just an introductory PowerPoint. It should look familiar. We did a similar thing last year that just tells you our initial starting point.
Good evening. I was promised a clicker here to switch my PowerPoints, and I see Dan vanished.
Jenna's got it.
Oh, Jenna, oh, she's got my clicker. Oh. Let's see if we can share the PowerPoint presentation that we prepared for you.
Oh, yeah.
As we're kind of getting that PowerPoint up, just a real quick walk through on Google Drive that was provided for you via a link. I've put those in order of how it is listed on a summary. Our general departments go first and the others are second. So I've had them numbered like in the order that they're going to go. So the first three documents that you have there is that high-level summary of our proposed budget. It also gives you some idea what those funding sources are. And it also provides you last year's budget of 2023, what got adapted. In addition to that, I've kind of separated any carry forwards we had and up-to-date current approved budget adjustments. So you can kind of see how much has that changed since 2023 got adapted. So the second document you're going to see in your share drive is the position requests. So this goes by, not really in any order. I try to put them in the order at first, but it lists a department and it identifies if this is a completely new request or if this is a change to an existing position. It also provides you a little detail as to why this position request came about. Also, it should tell you what the cost will be and any revenue sources that can be applied in those positions. And then there's the net. And the third document that you have is what we're going to go through in this workshop. In our department, we'll call it red and green, which means nothing to you. But what we did is we've highlighted areas that will need in the importance of attention. Let's just put it that way. So with that, I see my PowerPoint is ready to go. So welcome to our 2024 budget workshop. And I think I've got this clicker and, oh, there it is. There's the welcome. So here again, our objective is to really go over the budget, what we've prepared for you as a proposed budget. Look at some of the funding sources and disbursements, in other words, all the expenses. We're also going to give you a snapshot or review of our county levy limit and where we are at with debt. Also, we're all brought in forward our county general fund balance, and this is per our audit report. And we, of course, then I want to go through what are some of the assumptions that we've made in the proposed budget and some of the process review. The other is review the Dunn County proposed budget. Of course, we've prepared these fantastic summaries. These summaries are intended to give you a story. There are numbers on there, but we try to focus on that story so that the supervisors here can make a decision based on what is the need, why is it needed, is it statutory requirement, and so on. So there's a lot of wealth of information on there. And of course, we have the position requests that we're going to review. So I wanted to kind of point out key definitions here as you're reviewing those summaries. Like I said, there's quite a bit of information on those summaries. Sometimes I try to limit it to one page, but some of them, they just have to go to 5 and sometimes 6. So, but on the very bottom of those page or pages, there's the summary there, and there's a column called 2023 budget. So I just want to emphasize that this includes all approved carry forwards and budget adjustments that have been approved this year to date. When I say approved, the final approval through the last committee. That means they've gone through all the standing committees and the county board. And then there's a column for 2024 proposed budget. And I have a line there that's called tax levy. And there's 2 of them there. You'll see a tax levy, and then you'll see additional line called tax levy applied. So what that really is it's applied to 2024 estimated levy and shared revenue to each department's budget deficit that had a fund balance applied towards wages last year in 2023. Okay. I also want to point out that when you're looking at those summaries, I separated what was a budget adjustment or what was a carry forward, so that you see, so that those numbers are not intermingled. So when you see levy applied, that's what that means on that workbook. You also might see fund balance applied. I try to put as much footnotes so it translates, well, what does that mean? So those are just a couple things that I want to bring to your attention, but those are the definitions that I really want to point out on this PowerPoint. So at any time during this budget review, feel free to ask questions, including those definitions and what that all means. So I've also wanted to give you at a high level too is what is our proposed budget looks like? Where's our revenue come from? As you see, 42% is this billable service and fees. State and federal grants at our 20%. ARPA that we were able to apply is 2%. But keep in mind that this ARPA is actually the CIP that got approved. So no ARPA funds were applied to the operating budgets. Just want to make that clear. We have a vehicle registrations. That's also, highway. We have sales use tax, 5%. Fund balance, when that 2%, this is the fund balance again from CIP. Okay, no fund balance been applied without your authority towards this budget that we're presenting today. So that's 2% again, it's what got approved in CIP. And of course, 27 of that is levy. So this 27% levy includes all the shared revenue, the increases that came through that was best known to us. And of course, this is our disbursements or expenses. 51 of that is our staff, the people that provide the service. 41% is our operating costs. Our debt payment is about 5% of our total expense, and CIP again is that 3%. So I brought this forward as far as our levy limit. Our preliminary levy limit, because we still are waiting confirmation from Wisconsin Department of Revenue to give us those in order for me to complete that actual form to get the actual numbers. So here we estimated the best that we could with the methodology that's available to us. So right now we are at $24,044,110, which is an increase of $526 from 2023. So we also look at our debt. So these are as of 2022. The debt that we have is $32.65 million. So what does that mean to our general debt obligation, which is 17% of our county overall debt limit? So I wanted to point this out that we're not in debt to the point where it's not manageable. This is way below the recommended. So we're doing an excellent work. And our rating, of course, is excellent. I've also included the slide here to show you our current obligation debt. In comparison, what it will look like if we were to borrow $3 million from 2024 to 2028. This is just an example to illustrate what is that annual payment of debt is going to look like. So if, for example, if the county board were to decide to borrow in 2024, we would have a payment due. So what's included in that new total debt for that year, it's just the principal and interest that's due for that year because it's spread out for 10 years, assuming that's going to be 10 years for $3 million. So I just wanted to give you a little picture. What would that look like if we were to, if the county decides to go that route? I've also highlighted here just a little synopsis as to what did we borrow, where we are at, when are those payments, when is this debt going to be paid off? So this is as a reference for you. We didn't borrow any money in 2022. And well, no, we did, I'm sorry, 2023. We didn't borrow based on our financials. We review them on a regular basis. It doesn't appear like we might need to borrow. And then there was no money was agreed to borrow for 2024 KIP or our capital improvement plan. So this is again, just a little graph to let you, so you see how the debt is shrinking as we're paying off those, the debt. So here this is as of our audit report, 31st of 2021. Our audit for 2022 won't be available till September. So it's coming up here really soon. We anticipate that, you know, we might have to put back in a fund balance, but we just don't know that number yet. So I just presenting here is what you saw last time we met about budget. These are right off of our audit report, year ending 2021. So here's some budget processes and assumptions. Of course, here, the budget, the next step in this after post this workshop is that it goes to executive committee for their review and balancing on September 13th and October 14th. So what we're working on is really that initial first round of our proposed budgets. And I've highlighted some of the assumptions that were made in this budget. We asked all the departments to propose a budget with a cost to continue to present what would it cost them to continue their services. We also made the assumption that there is zero increase in health insurance. And then there is one step compensation increase and compensation mid-grid at a 2% increase. So I believe I'm going to turn this over to our HR director, and she can explain to you more about HR and our staff.
Okay, so leading into, Beata had just provided the assumptions of providing a 2% increase overall to the grid. We thought it was important to provide you some of our workforce data information. Some of you in this room, this will be a repeat. We did share a little bit more in-depth presentation at the Committee on Administration and at the Executive Committee. So this will be a repeat somewhat, but it is, I promise, very much more condensed. I have the deeper information if anyone's interested. But just wanted to kind of provide an update on our workforce. So we currently, when this data was pulled roughly a month and a half ago, have 523 active employees. You can see on the top, this pie chart on the top represents the age of our workforce. And this shows us that 18% of our current employees are already at the age to retire. They could decide tomorrow that they want to retire. I have a clicker here. So that's that light blue piece of the pie up there. And we also have an additional 12% that will reach retirement age within the next 5 years. So we felt this was important to highlight because that is 30% of our workforce that could very likely choose to retire within the next 5 years. Not including voluntary resignations and things of that sort. Oops. We also thought it was important to share with the board that with regard to years of service, our employee workforce, currently 33% has worked here less than 1 year. So we already have a third of our workforce that is new. And within 5 years, we will have nearly another third that may retire. So we've been talking about retention and recruitment a lot, as many employers are, but we thought that it was important information to share with this board as far as where we stand. So it goes without saying that recruitment and retention has been and will remain a priority for at least the next 5 years. Any questions on that before I move on? Okay. So we also,
Hang on, Supervisor Gary Bjork.
A 35-year-old or 35-year employee has worked here for 35 years is replaced with a one at a lot lower step. What is the average that could be saved by that person taking that?
so that would be dependent on where that certain position is placed on the wage grid, which I will kind of describe here on the next slide. Basically how our wage grid is structured, right? What does that mean? What does 2% mean if we apply that to the wage grid? So to answer your question, if we use one of these examples, I understand the text is really small, so I apologize for that. But if we said an administrative clerk on grade D was at step 11, they would be making $22.39 an hour. If we filled that position and hired somebody at step 1, they would start at $17.07 per hour. So that's just one example. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, so like I said, we just wanted to provide kind of a rundown of how our pay grid is built. We have pay grades A through W. I don't really know why we didn't go all the way to Z. There are a few at the very top that aren't used currently. So the grades, A being at the top is the lowest paid grade, all the way down to W would be the highest paid. I don't have the entire grid up here just because it's too large. And then within each grade, there are 11 steps. So we had just provided an example of one position being placed at a certain grade, and anyone in that position could be paid anywhere from a step 1 to a step 11. Within each step is a 2.75% increase. So when we talk about proposing a 2% market adjustment to the grid, that means applying 2% overall as you've also heard of it called a cost of living adjustment. This would positively impact all employees that are on the pay grid. It is also helpful in remaining competitive to keep our wage grid in line with our comparables. And I'll provide a little bit more information on the next slide with regard to where we sit as far as market comparables. The 2.75% lies between each step. So for example, the small shorter arrow on, is that H? Grade H shows that between step 1 and step 2, that's a 2.75% increase. And that is consistent across the whole grid. Employees that receive a satisfactory performance evaluation, and as long as step increases are approved by the board with the budget, receive a step increase each year until they reach step 11. Once they reach step 11, they don't receive a step, but if there is a cost of living or a market adjustment made to the grid, they would receive that increase. Any questions about how the pay grid works? All right. Okay, so we also wanted to provide some information on our market analysis that was completed by Carlson Detman. So recall in 2022, we had implemented a full classification and compensation study. That was not done again. We just simply had Carlson Detman review where we were placed with regard to market. And that was conducted during the first 2 quarters of this year. We have established 28 comparable counties. They also use some private sector data where it fits. and also, other federal data that is available. And they review 74 what they call benchmark positions as part of this market analysis. So they don't actually look at every single position that we have at the county. They take 74 positions that they consider to be comparable amongst, most counties. You can imagine we have some unique positions, and then they determine where we stand with regard to that. So as a result of this study, we do have it broken down between our general county grid and the neighbors of Dunn County pay grid. The lower grades, so this is grade starting A through F, I believe, shows that it is above market currently by about 0.5%. The middle grades are currently below market by about 1.38%. And the upper grades are currently below market by 2.48%. So this analysis tells us that our lower grade positions are fairly well positioned. Our upper grade positions are falling a little bit behind. At the neighbors of Dunn County, the lower grades are currently below by 0.85%. Middle grades currently actually above market by 5.73. And this is intentional. When the first classification and compensation study was conducted, and a lot of the reason why there was a separate pay grid implemented for NDC was that nursing staff group. So if you think of your RNs, they are in that middle grade level on the NDC grid. So there was a need to set them a little bit higher just to keep up with the private sector market. And then the upper grades on the NDC grid are above by 2.91%. So ultimately, there is a much longer report that was provided from Carlson Detman, but this is the summary of the analysis and the recommendation from the consultant that in order to keep our pay grids in a competitive position, they recommended at least a 2% to a 4% market adjustment. So we just wanted to provide some information on where we landed with regard to that 2%. Are there any questions?
Supervisor Quinn.
Thank you. Just wondering, does this study take into consideration our healthcare benefits or any retirement benefits that we offer, or are those separately calculated?
So this market analysis was completely on the base pay.
Okay.
It didn't look at the total compensation package, including benefits. So just truly only this pay grid, our employees where they're currently compensated with regard to the comparable counties.
Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm that we're talking about municipalities, just counties and cities, no public comparisons. We're not being compared to any public, private. Private. Yeah.
There was some private sector data referenced for more so for the nursing home, just because there is a limited comparable pool with regard to county nursing homes. Private sector data is difficult. They had shared that once we have it, it's old because it moves a little bit more quickly. But there was some private sector data considered for that purpose.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm not looking for private sector data. I just wanted to confirm we're comparing apples to apples. And then with the neighbors, they're really competing with private sector for the most part.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Keeter.
thank you. I was just curious about the 33% of one-year employees. Is that something that's high, low, or fairly normal, or?
So I did provide a little bit more in-depth review of the last 5 years. I will say it has increased quite dramatically since 2018. So that is a growing number and expected to continue growing just by way of the aging workforce.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any questions from anything that you've seen or heard so far?
Supervisor Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to be addressing the insurance issues individually, or should I ask the question now?
You can certainly ask the question now.
Okay, my question is, if the deductible that we have for our employees is reduced, does the county then have to make up the difference?
So Jenna. I'm gonna start talking and then I'm gonna say, why am I talking? Because Jenna knows this. So.
So if we were in a situation where we could reduce employee deductibles and there was an employee on the plan that reached their deductible, since we are self-funded, our self-funded plan would start paying the majority of those claims sooner. So if we dropped, which we did for 2023, we dropped our single deductible, for example, from 3,000 to 2,500. So the plan will start kicking in the majority of the cost of claims at $2,500 instead of 3,000.
The reason I asked this question is a recruitment and retention, the insurance benefit package is very important. And it's my understanding going forward over the next 10 or 15 years, the workforce in Wisconsin is going to shrink. And employers that have, the employers that will be the most successful will be very competitive wage-wise and benefit-wise. Thank you.
Thank you. More to come on health insurance updates. in a future
Supervisor-
meeting.
Supervisor Larry Burke, in just a moment, I will contextualize something that Jenna said. Through some very dedicated work on the AHR department, our insurance costs have actually gone down a little bit, and we are hoping to see that go more, which is one of the reasons we can afford to lower the deductible. They've been doing amazing work on that. All right, Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should have asked this before. On the comparables, you said it was 28 counties. And I guess two things on that.
Counties and cities.
Pardon me?
Counties, and there are some cities.
Oh, okay. So basically, I'm trying to get around to the fact, how does cost of living fit into this, and how are we being compared as far as a rural county versus an urban county?
I can provide more in-depth information on how comparables were selected, if you'd like.
Just your opinion on.
County demographics, location are things that are considered. The size of the county and things like that are considered in selecting the comparables. It doesn't always mean that the county next door is automatically considered a comparable if they're a lot smaller, if they have a lot, less employees, things like that. So it does range quite a bit. And I'd be happy to provide that full report if you were interested.
Well, not really. I just harken back to a school board negotiating meeting, and our comparables were schools that were in our same sports conference instead of anything else. And how wacky is that?
Okay, yeah, that sounds a little different than our approach.
Okay, I would I would also.
Yes.
All right, so you have in front of you some reference documents. We printed them because I want you to be able to hang on to them and review them as we work our way through budget over the next couple of months, actually. And while the numbers will change a little bit, kind of shift a little bit here and there, depending on some of the decisions that you make and are made, the general concepts stay in the same. So I did bring them up so that the people that are attending remotely can see them. So the first one is really just an overview, and Beata gave you a slide as well in the PowerPoint, and we will drop that PowerPoint into the sharing link after this meeting. It was being worked on right up until the very end, so we didn't have time to get it out there quite yet. But this really breaks down from our budget, how is our budget funded? And so you can see that in that light lime greenish color, we have billable services and fees. So if you think about people who pay to have their restaurant licenses, or if you think about people who come to the behavioral health clinic in the Department of Human Services, things like that. Those are things that we bill for and are able to collect money from. That's 38 million of our revenue sources come from that source. Grants and state allocations, state monies that come to us. So your property tax comes back to us in the form of on our county side, and our income tax comes back to us on the state side in terms of like a state allocation. And I mean, it's passed through to departments in the state level, and then they pass it through to us. That's about $18 million of our budget is funded by those state grants and allocations. Levy for your taxes, the property taxes collected, our portion of those are about 24.5 million. And then our sales tax and shared revenue numbers and vehicle registration fees are about $6 million. So let me just dig a little tiny bit into sales tax. So if you think about statewide, the sales tax is 5% in Wisconsin, and Dunn County and many other places have passed legislation to be able to add 0.5% to that. That's the statutory limit that you can add. And so we have that extra 0.5%. That extra 0.5% generates for us between $4 and $5 million a year. And then the shared revenue, you heard a lot of conversation about that. That's essentially was a static number for many years. And this year, the legislature took some action to raise that. So part of that's included in that. And then again, the vehicle registration fee, which is about just under $800,000, $780,000. And then the other ways that we'll talk about in a bit that things can be funded would be with fund balance, which is appropriate only to be used, our general fund balance to be used only for one-time kinds of things. You don't want to use that for your operating expenses, and then short or long-term borrowing. And let me switch slides. So what is our gap? And again, if this is for some of you only your kind of your second time through this, you're going to probably gasp, but this is not an unusual gap at this stage of the process. Maybe it's a little higher than it usually is, but it's not that unusual. So between what we have funding for and what has been requested, we have a $6.7 million gap. So what is in that gap? So salaries, that 2% increase and the step adjustment. So again, the whole grid is going up by 2%, and people that are on step 1 move to step 2, that are on step 2 move to step 3, etc. That's how it's proposed. That's how the budget's currently drafted. It doesn't have to stay that way, but that's how it currently is drafted. Those two things constitute $1.4 million of that. Every percentage point difference, so we're at 2%. If we were going to go to 3%, it would cost about $400,000 more. If we were going to go to from 2% to 1%, it would save about $400,000. So it's a ballpark number, but it's based on real numbers, real calculations. But it's about $400,000 per percentage point. And then there's the steps in there as well. New position requests, which you will hear in just a minute, constitute $623,000 of that request. New products or services. So we have some one-time expenditures that you will hear review of as the departments present those. And then we have some ongoing operational expenditures that have increased, constitute about $300,000 of that request. There are decreased revenues in our budget, meaning we used to get some money that we're not getting at this stage of the game, or we're not sure that we'll get. I didn't quantify that number because it's a little complicated to do that and give you a solid number for it. Just to know that for some departments, their salary costs went up and their revenues might have gone down slightly. Anything major in all of that, we accounted for, but there are some slight decreases in some monies that we have received previously that we're not receiving now. So then there's two types of highway projects. The first are highway projects that utilize our county workforce, our highway department staff to do the project and working on county roads. Those are $2.1 million worth of the request. And then the others are state highway projects that have state match of funding. And Dustin's going to immerse you in highway in a bit, but have state match for funding and use a contracted workforce. So we're contracting out for the completion of the work. And those are about $2.255 million. Any questions about those things? So it's they're backwards in the sense of when you're looking at them on your form, but the one is like in the sense sort of where does the money come from? And then where's the money? If you think about like a hourglass, here's coming in and then where's it going? And the bottom are those things that are listed up here in that $6.7 million.
Supervisor Lino.
Yes, Chris, I've got a quick question regarding the new position requests. Are these new position requests a continuation of positions we haven't been able to fill?
No, these are brand new, stinking new positions.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so that's part of what you will hear in just a moment. So last year, if you'll recall, we took you through kind of an overview of all of the departments. This year, you have that money available, or you have that information available to you on the shared link that we've provided to you. You can go in and you can look at all of the summaries. You can see descriptions of what the departments do, what the various programs are, how many staff there are, how much money that they have allocated to their budget. But we're not going to spend time this evening going over every department, because as you'll see in a minute, some of them are only changing by salary, and that salary is in that one big pot of the $1.4 million. So whatever you do with that is going to influence the departments.
One more question.
So what I just to say, so the new positions though are actually set out and they're identified, and we'll go through them all so you can know what they are.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Thomas.
You, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Looking at how the county government is funded, back to that part of the report here, like compared to past, how much have those numbers increased just off the top of our heads? Like, has there been a 1% increase, a 2% increase in those numbers, 3%? So have those numbers growing?
So I don't know what to tell you in terms of an actual percentage, and we can certainly calculate that. What I would say is that the county budget grows every year. And so something funds that, because in one slide that we probably will bring back we'll probably bring in for September, so shows that our actual tax rate, our mill rate, has actually dropped over the last decade. So other things are funding those increases. So I don't know what the exact dollar or the percentage amounts or dollar amounts, but government continues to grow. The amount that we're taxing people for that growth has dropped. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that it's not coming from an increased state tax or federal tax or whatever, but
Supervisor Barrier.
So the shared revenue package that was recently passed, is that revenue available to us this budget cycle, or is that sometime in the future?
it will be available to us in 2024. Yes, for this budget cycle.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay, so now let's go to our infamous, I don't know, we just get a kick out of calling it the red green sheet. Did anybody used to watch that show? So again, as I referenced, so on the first page where all of the numbers are green, those are all of the departments in which the ask that you see highlighted in green, or some of them are in parentheses, which means that they're actually using less, like in child support, they're using less than they did last year, or it's a 0, so they're not asking for more or less. All of those departments their increases are largely salary. Now, I'm not telling you there's not a tiny bit of some operating increases. So for instance, I used Tom Carlson as our surveyor from our example from last year, because last year when we said 0% increase and Tom said, but I need like $300 a year more for fuel costs. That would be an operational increase. Those may be reflected in here, but they're very small amounts and they're not really, in a sense, worth my judgment, but not really worth discussing because they're just the continued cost of doing business and it's a small amount. So the bigger numbers that you see starting on the left-hand side with HR and the CJC and child support, et cetera, those are all mostly 98% salary. On the flip side of it, you have the 8 departments that have actual increases and asks. And again, you'll see that some of your letter numbers are green and some of your numbers are red. So your red numbers, so the top part just gives you kind of all of the roll-up data, what was last year's adopted, what's this year's proposed, kind of what's the difference. But then the next section down where it starts with wages increase, position changes, that details out for you what is that ask. So if you follow on the left-hand side, at the top left-hand side, the Department of Administration, the County Manager and Finance, you will see that there is a $244,000 gap. My part, County Manager and Finance, part of that $6.7 million is $244,000, and of that, $84,000 are in that wage pot. So they're in green because once you deal with wages in one area, you're going to deal in wages for everybody. The other 2 then are in red because those are actually changes or increased asks from the current year. And I'll circle back to those in just a minute because I'll be the first one to tell you about our ask. But so you can see as you go through that then, we're going to ask each of these red group to come up and talk with you about what constitutes their red number. And a lot of them are positions, a few of them are operations, but you will see that. So any questions about that? All right, so that being said, let me just really quick talk about the Department of Administration, County Manager and Finance Department, and then I will invite Beata up to talk about the finance piece of it. So one of the increases in the county manager's budget, and I have talked about it with the Committee on Administration and with the Executive Committee, was actually a position request to add an assistant county manager position. That's costed out, estimated at $141,000. The purpose to that request is really because we have undertaken a number of initiatives and projects. I spend about 30% of my time, between 25 and 35% of my time in committee meetings with all of you. I have found that invaluable in terms of understanding what's happening in the county, but it is a fairly significant time commitment, and it does limit the amount of things that I'm able to do outside of that. In addition to that, when I came on board, the entire team is relatively new. We have a CFO that's been here about 19 months. We have a CIO who's been here a little over 2 years. We have an HR director who's been here a little over a year, the county manager. So it takes a fair amount of time for us to just navigate what was and what is and what do we want things to be. Now, that being said, a little preview. I have a different solution for that problem of capacity that would not cost $141,000. And that would be to provide some funding for to move that the responsibility for assistant county manager to attach it to an existing department. So for instance, I'm going to just take veterans because I know Greg is here and I know there he is. And I know Greg wants to be the assistant county manager because he's just been begging me every day for this job. And so I don't really think Greg wants to be the assistant county manager. But let's say that Greg threw his hat in the ring to become an assistant county manager. I think for probably, I'm just going to kind of spitball a number and say for about $25,000, we could add some responsibilities to Greg's plate, provide him a little bit more compensation for that, and give him some money to backfill a little bit of his staffing so that he could have some of his existing staff do some of the things that he currently does. So I think for a relatively small amount of money, we could create the position. It creates the authority essentially to act on, sort of in the stead of the county manager. We probably split up some of the committee meetings so that I didn't have quite so many evening meetings, but also looking at projects that we've been interested. We have talked sometimes about like doing some exploration with some grant writing, having a position for doing that could be some of the responsibilities. I've worked pretty deeply in economic development and spent a fair amount of time there. We have our housing work group that we're working on. We have a broadband work group that we're working on. So we have a number of initiatives, and it would be kind of sharing that responsibility and giving that person kind of the title to be able to sit in those meetings and make decisions about those projects. So I anticipate that number, that $141,000 number, will come down dramatically because I think that we can make that a different process work, and whether or not that's approved ultimately or not will be the decision of the executive committee and then ultimately the county board. But that is the proposed solution to that. That being said, any questions about any of that? All right, then we're going to have Beata speak briefly about her $18,620 of position changes.
Yes, so the dollar amount that we're asking for, it's really the difference between what the position currently is. If this was to be approved, that would be the increase. So that's what you're seeing. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we're asking to change 2 existing positions. So this will not require us to go and post and hire a new staff. So this would be potentially with recruited internally or listed internally. So that gives our existing staff opportunity to grow. And the reason we're asking for taking our 2 positions and making them into management positions. Since I've came on board, we've been working very diligently with highway. We've looked at current practices. We've reached out to a consultant to assist us with looking at existing processes, best practice, make sure that every penny is accounted for, that it's built for accurately. We've done a lot of work. We've set the grounds, but now it's time to continue on with that legacy. Right now, I have an assistant finance director who oversees majority of that staff. It's overwhelming for her. We would like to add another management position that will support highway. There is that need to really, again, foster and keep going forward with some of that taking a leadership decision-making. Those will be managing those day-to-day operations. Our assistant finance director will still remain in the picture. But right now, she also manages day-to-day operations. The other reason is we're trying to set us for success during our ERP implementation. Sooner or later, we're going to have to make a decision. What we're going to do with our existing system. So I wanted us to set up us for success, meaning that I want to be able to have appropriate staff trained so they can carry on the torch, which will relieve some of the key individuals that we want to partake in making this project a success. Oh, I'm sorry, ERP, it would be taking our existing financial system and upgrading it to something new, maybe completely something new, or taking what we currently have and upgrading it to a more robust system. Enterprise resource system. It's our accounting and finance system. Thank you. So the second reason, as I mentioned, is to set that succession line as well. Once the ERP is complete, then we also have a lot of new projects that I've been wanting to implement for some time. And one is internal audit. We don't have internal audit. This will allow our the assistant finance director and CFO and myself to focus on internal controls around our disbursements, our P-card purchases. There is a lot of, we've been going to training, we've been getting current, and there's a lot of room and opportunities to make that happen. Right now, we just don't have the bandwidth. So that would be the other position that I'm asking is to upgrade that to a manager position, which will provide support to DHS. As you know, DHS, there's a lot of complexities in that department. Last time I counted was about 72 different funding sources. So we need to be on top of our billing, make sure that our rates are up to speed. All the insurance is being billed. There's a lot of, as the slide here said, there's a chunk of money that comes from our billable services. If you look at DHS, we have consumers, or I should say constituents or customers come to get a service. Some of them don't have insurance. Some of them are on medical assistance. So there is a lot of work that goes into that. Sometimes you need pre-authorizations. So there is a lot of moving component. And again, right now, I just have one individual that's running a lot of these programs, and it's time for us to kind of separate some of those duties. And one last thing I want to mention too is as we brought the new auditors on board, one of the items that they told us that really needs our attention is really the separation of duties and relieving some of our assistant finance director from all the tasks that she currently manages. So any questions for me? So the difference between where they are now and the difference for if you were to support this and approve, it's approximately $18,000 and $600 or something like that. Now, there's some very little room of revenue source for those positions that will be supporting DHS. Of course, they can claim against some federal grants. So I'm not gonna go into weeds with those grants, but there are some grants that will allow us to push on expenses and continue on getting reimbursement on the federal side. So with that, I estimate it to be about $4,000. So that brings an ask for that 14,600. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have for me. Yes.
Supervisor Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vieta, my question is on the auditing firm that said we have some shortcomings as far as separation of duties. Is that a function of the size of our county versus other businesses? I know on a smaller level, village level, we always have that every year. They tell us that they should do that, but because of our size, we can't do it. It doesn't make
Right.
sense. Does any of this is that any of the reason for those?
Yes, one of the reasons, absolutely. Right now, we have, as I said, our assistant CFO, and she has her hands, hopefully it doesn't come out wrong, but she has a lot of responsibilities that auditors believe she should be relieved. And a lot of those tasks are management type of tasks that I can't delegate them to anyone else. So I only have 2 managers. They do fantastic work. I have one manager that focuses on the NDC, and she also focuses on billing, which is also in DHS. And then we also have the financial system. I believe, we have great assets in that team. And my goal is to really get down into those opportunities that's been sitting, redo and revamp our internal operational policies. That needs to go and be looked at very thoroughly. There's a lot of training and transition. You can't put operational policies and put it out there and hope everybody finds it and everything goes great. So there's a lot of monitoring controls around our expenses, our disbursements. We have a good, I feel comfortable with the controls we have, but there's definitely room for improvement. I hear articles of incidences happen where there's money misappropriated, and it's scary. It can happen to anybody. So we need to kind of look at those, put in tighter controls and say, how we're doing business. Is this the best practice?
And Supervisor Steen, again, in just a moment, I will also note contextually for many of the supervisors who haven't been around for a long time, our previous audit firm was also concerned with exactly those things. It sounds like the expressed concern is a little bit higher now, but that's certainly been something that would be nice to have solved long ago, and it would be great to solve now. Supervisor Steen and then Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Yes, Vieta, I guess if I'm understanding this correctly, it's looks like a job description change and moving these 2 people into management versus not being in management. Is that correct?
Yeah, we already have these job descriptions, so they already exist. This would be taking those 2 positions and promoting within. We would put an ad, internally recruit and who applies, and we would select the best candidate.
And if I'm understanding it correctly, moving them into a management position would lend itself to satisfying the auditors in some way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. When I came on board, we had a vacancy for the highway manager. We recruited for that position. We had some challenges filling in that position. At that time, I was new in my role, and we had goals, priorities that we wanted to tackle at the highway department. So at that time, we felt the need was to hire a lead instead, knowing that down the road, as we're progressing, making those changes and implementations and re-engineering some processes, that eventually we would review and say, well, what is that ongoing need? So I'm asking for taking that position or one of the positions and making it management. I've also met with management at Highway, also met with all the other departments, including DHS, exactly what is the need. And then so we had a lot of discussion throughout the year, so I'm asking for those two.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got two things.
Mhm.
Number one is, I would assume that in finance and what we were talking about here, the number of slots or the number of jobs that need to be done, are probably the same from, one county to another.
Right.
So just that the dollar amounts might change. So, it'd really be helpful for me to know if we're efficient in what we're doing compared to other counties. And then to throw in kind of I have no idea, but just negative bias is that I always feel that people that are on the job at the workplace are more efficient than people that are working from home. And do you have any opinion on that?
Well, studies will show, me being in academia, studies will show that employees are productive when they work from home. Now, that doesn't mean everyone is at 100%. Working from home has pros and cons. My opinion is that my opinion is that as far as my staff is concerned, work is getting done and I'm seeing deliverables. And that's, if they're remote or if they're in the office, things are getting reported timely, things are getting paid and completed timely. I have no concerns that things are not getting done. Now, things are getting done. I'm looking at the outcomes. Again, that gives me the sign that they're doing their work. It's not any different than if they were in the office.
And I'm gonna close that down a little bit as it's kind of tangential to the budget discussion as a whole, and we want to keep this thing rolling. Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This accounting manager is coming from, existing staff. Does somebody have to be hired to take that person's job that's, going up the ladder, or it's just one person being promoted and that's it?
Just one person getting promoted and that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, and no more questions. Thank you very much for your consideration. I'm sorry? All right, Dan, here it goes.
Hello. So my request isn't for a position, but it is for existing ongoing funding, and is somewhat related to a position, and that is it's not reasonable for us to hire people to do, or a person to do what we need done. So we're looking to pay for a service that can do a lot of this work for us. So this graphic that I have up on the screen kind of describes a scenario of, it's essentially a phishing attack, that somebody gets a bad email, clicks on a link. It brings them up to a web page, they download something, it installs on their computer. As these different things happen, there's logs that are created. We can log that somebody received an email. We can log that somebody went to a web page. We can log that something was installed on a computer. When these things happen, independently, these actions don't necessarily look like anything bad. But when you put all of them together, that is a sign of something very bad happening, and to be able to track that. So the system, the solution that we're looking to purchase is commonly referred to as a SIEM. Do I have the acronym up there? It stands for Security Event and Information Management. But ultimately, what it does is it takes all of these log files and correlates them into one specific spot. Now, the next step of that is somebody has to be looking at them. and to be able to identify that some anomaly has happened and now we need to take action. Security events, cybersecurity events do not happen between 8 and 4:30. So just so you know, they happen after hours. So that's where I come down to, like, I can't ask for a position. I need 24/7 monitoring to do that. So the ask that I'm looking for here is to pay for a monitoring system that are, well, a monitoring solution, essentially to pay a company to be monitoring these things, to notify us when these things happen and to take action 24/7, 365. So that solution costs $64,000 as an annual cost, includes shipping all of our logs, unlimited log files up to this solution. And like I said, 24/7, 365 monitoring of all of these solutions. And so I have a few statistics in there, but that's basically my ask is for $64,000 to add this solution. I would add that we've done security assessments with the federal government, the state government, and other agencies. And this is one of the top things that they suggest that any company should implement. And so that's the reason for my ask. Is there any questions?
Supervisor Lino.
So we have requirements. So there are federal requirements that are set for essentially cloud hosting of government data. So the companies that we are looking at all meet those qualifications, which essentially would qualify them to house Department of Defense data or any sort of thing. So how secure is anything? This one meets the requirements that have been set forth by the Department of Defense. So that's kind of where we call the top level. So yep. All right.
So on your red-green sheet, you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner, the county clerk's request for an increase. Every 2 years, I will be up here on the red file, apparently, because every 2 years, we go from 2 elections a year to 4 elections a year. In the even number years, we always have 4 elections. Next year will be unique. I don't know if you've watched the news, but there are some people running for some very high offices in this slant. We'll have a presidential election, and those cost a lot of money. So if you look, you can actually see that the increase in operations is $67,000. That is not only for the presidential election next November, but a statewide primary that we'll have in August, a April election for spring offices, including all of your offices, in addition to municipal offices and school districts, in addition to the fact that we will have a presidential preference election that coincides with your April election. There will also be a primary in February. That's not necessarily always guaranteed, but there will most likely be a primary in many of the different school districts for next year. So the $67,000 is that. The other part is you can see in green, there was a slight wage decrease, a change in benefits from the deputy county clerk. So we are saving some money that way. And then, but what we're asking for is I'm asking for a additional part-time administrative clerk. Of the counties that are comparable to our size in the state of Wisconsin, we have one of the smallest county clerk's offices in the state. Polk County, for example, is smaller than us, just barely, and they have a full-time county clerk, a full-time deputy clerk, and a full-time administrative clerk. I'm asking for a part-time administrative clerk just to be able to continue to do the operations of our office, especially next year, which will be quite a busy year. In addition, I've set some priorities and goals, and many of you have heard me talk about that, to get out into the different municipalities to make sure that we're training individuals to run elections so that all elections are run the same way across our entire county. So in order to do that, we need a little bit of administrative support. So that's what I'm asking for. The only caveat I'll mention is that the Department of Homeland Security has listed our office and any electoral administrator's office, of which I am the election administrator for the county, as critical infrastructure for the for the functioning of government. We're one of the only elected official offices that are listed that way currently. One of my county clerk colleagues said, if you thought 2020 was something, 2024 is going to be like, hold my beer. So we're really trying to be prepared in any way that we can for what 2024 might bring. The Department of Homeland Security is actually coming out to do an assessment of security and safety for our office. We're really trying to make sure we're putting as many steps in place as possible to be prepared for 2024. So it's an increase for the cost of running 4 elections next year, and then position increase of a part-time administrative clerk. Are there any questions? Okay. Oh, I can't turn you on.
Supervisor Hagan.
Can you turn them on? Can you turn his mic on? I can't. Okay,
There we
there,
go.
okay.
All right, thank you.
Got it, I think.
So, just for, my knowledge,
Yeah.
For the elections every 2-4 years, all that stuff. So, your change every year in your budget, like you're asking for this for the presidential elections for 2024, then 2025, there's none or less or whatnot. You're asking on that, it will like ostensibly subtract this amount because that's not happening. But since this office and these things happen on such a regular basis, I'm just thinking aloud here, so feel free to say absolutely not. But is there a way, it seems, I get it, but is there a way of setting aside like a nest egg for this type of service that the county provides on a regular basis and draw from that during the years where it's needed?
It's an excellent question. I think that would be up to how we'd want to maybe adjust the budget process to set money aside. So, but you bring up a good point. So I'm asking for an increase next year of $67,000 to run these 4 elections. But in 2025, that number will come back down $67,000. So I'll be in the green in 2025. Very excited about that. But that would be a change in the budgetary process that we use. There's certainly that we could certainly explore that option. It would have to be conversations that I would have with Beata and Chris, but I mean, to just knowing that every even number year, we're going to have 4 elections, right? Yeah, that's a good thought.
Yeah, I think that historically, the reason it hasn't been done that way is it would involve a budget carryover. And budgeting it this way is slightly simpler, but certainly makes a certain amount of sense.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you to our district attorney.
Good evening. I'm here to ask, I have currently two victim witness assistants, one that is 0.75 and one that is 0.58, and I'm requesting that they get moved to be 2 full-time positions. So there would be 1 victim witness coordinator and then 3 full-time assistants. Part of the reason for my request has been over the last few years, we've seen a large increase in the number of victims that we're serving. 2020 is when Marcy's Law was passed, so I don't know if that brought up the public awareness. I don't know why that is, but our numbers have increased large enough as to why I'm here asking for these positions. In 2019, Dunn County received 2 full-time additional assistant district attorneys as a result of the increased caseload and cases that we're seeing in the criminal courts. And then in 2020 is when Marcy's Law was passed, which gave victims of crimes a constitutional right, as well as some additional rights that have increased the workload and responsibilities of the victim witness staff. And then in 2021, the 3rd branch in Dunn County was given a third branch. And so I think it just goes to show the increase that we're seeing. And during that time, the victim witness staff have not increased. This next slide, I think I have a repeated one of the rights, and I'm not going to go through all those different rights, but one of them is victims have a right to be present for all proceedings, and they have the right to request to be accompanied by a victim witness staff member. And so part of the problem that I'm having with only 2 full-time staff is when I have court going in 3 different branches, and I have victim cases that could particularly be in all 3 branches, I'm not able to provide the continuity of victim witness staff. I've had to pull at time a legal secretary to go accompany a victim, and really our constituents deserve more than that. They deserve to have our citizens who have been victims of a crime for nothing that they did deserve to sort of see that same person and not have to reintroduce themselves and be accompanied by someone else. And so I'm requesting these additional positions because they are both grant funded. They receive federal funds through the Victim of Crimes Act, as well as Chapter 950, which is the statute that mandates that counties have a victim witness program. Sort of a calculation based on, it's a complicated calculation, but to have those 2 positions go to full-time is roughly about a $25,000 increase that I'm asking. I also want to note that if a victim believes that their rights have been violated, or that they are not getting, their privacy is not protected, or they're not getting the services that they're constitutionally entitled to, they can file a report or claim with the Crime Victim Rights Board, and then investigates that. And then that could lead to a civil claim, as well as sanctions against the county potentially. And so I know that budgets are tight. You have a lot to cut here, it sounds like tonight. And I would not be asking for this if I didn't think it was necessary. And if our citizens and crime victims deserve to have better services with more staff. Any questions?
Super.
Yep. So as the county manager said, I'm taking 2 existing positions, one that's 0.67% and one that's 0.58% to 2 full-time positions. So roughly, is that like a half position essentially I'm requesting?
Supervisor Lino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question that I have is, since this law was passed on a federal basis, to my understanding?
It's
The
state.
state, okay. Do we get any money from the state?
We do. We get Chapter 950 is a grant that we already receive. And so it's a calculation. It varies every year, but every position already will receive a proportion. I can't tell you the exact amount because it changes every year, but we already will, and we would continue to receive a portion based on the increase as well.
Speaking of portion, how much of, any idea, percentage, how much of that portion would be able to go to this?
So roughly the additional levy cost for the county is about 25,000. And so then the rest we're already calculating roughly what the grant kicking in would be. So it's roughly about 25,000 additional for the county.
Okay, so we're already kind of spending this, or?
Well, we already do have the 2 full-time positions and then the 2 part-time positions.
And that's what's funding that.
Yeah, but we're already, every single victim witness receives some grant funds towards the cost.
Okay. Maybe we can ask for more?
Yeah, I've been looking for years.
Okay.
And so is everyone else, every other county.
Okay.
And the CJCC has been looking for quite some time to try to find some additional grants. There's certainly a need. It's just the state has not stepped up, and neither has the feds.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that Marshall is with us online.
That's correct. For the sheriff's office, for 2024, our request for 2 full-time positions. The first of these positions was a recreation deputy. This is the same request that was submitted last year and withdrawn by our department for budget purposes. At this point, we do a lot of recreational patrol, which is reimbursed through the DNR. We have several duties under that, and there's snowmobile, UTV, and boating. On average, for all of these patrols we get an average of 75% of our pay reimbursed through the state for these tasks. We currently do have an UTV, 2 boats and 2 snowmobiles that were purchased and have been reimbursed through the DNR. Several of them are paid off. Some of them are still in the process of being paid off at a 20% rate over a 5-year period. Reason we're asking for this position is a lot of these enforcement tasks are pretty specific, and we all know that the recreation in our county has grown over the years. I think everybody that's been out knows that UTV use has increased greatly, and over the last year or so, with the allowing of UTVs to be operated on township and county roads, has increased the presence other than off-road in the county. If we got this position, approximately 75% of it, like I said earlier, would be reimbursed, which you can anticipate would be about $60,000 to $70,000 per year. In addition, that the hours that they would not be working recreational patrol, this position could be a backfill for regular patrol or any other assignment in the sheriff's office, because they would be a deputy sheriff and trained fully as so. With this time that they wouldn't be assigned to recreation patrol, they could be assigned to other duties, which would eliminate the need for calling other employees in or filling vacant shifts or responsibilities with overtime. It would be hard to say what that savings would be, but above and over their responsibilities being paid back through the state under the DNR grants, they could be a money saver through the use of them to backfill positions otherwise being filled through overtime, whether that be vacation or just short staffing. The second position we're asking for is a full-time jail sergeant position. We currently have 4 jail sergeants within the jail. One of those is assigned full-time Monday through Friday with primary responsibilities of supervision during the day, assisting jail staff with movement of prisoners, following up on Huber checks, along with assisting bringing them to court and other supervisory responsibilities. The other 3 are spread throughout the day, covering night shifts also. The biggest gap we have not having a 4th sergeant position, a 5th sergeant position, would be the nighttime hours. And unfortunately, our night shift has the youngest group of people within our correctional officer positions. We have a large number of hires within the last few years, of which you're all aware of, and they're all working night shift, and with this gap being left unsupervised. We do trust them to work these hours. We all realize that corrections is a high liability and high risk position, and being 24-hour coverage of supervision is what we're requesting for by asking for this new position. If anybody has any questions regarding either position, the recreation officer position or the correctional officer sergeant's position, I'm ready to answer as best I can.
Supervisor Kinnear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Marshall, now I'm looking at the recreational request. So it's my understanding from last year's request that the officer keeps track of the time, and if they spend 50% of their time on the recreational area, they would be reimbursed for 50% or and so on. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's part of the hard part with this. When we do it now, these positions are posted, And with being short, sometimes they don't get filled, so it's kind of money left on the table, as well as the fact that this enforcement is not being done to the level it probably should be. If someone was assigned to this position full time, currently our field services captain keeps track of these hours and applies for the reimbursement, which is time consuming. If we had one person assigned to this, they would do all that, all the submission for reimbursement. They could also act as a liaison and training officer that could attend, township and UTV, ATV, snowmobile meetings, provide education, and work with the clubs to, provide what they need as far as information to make this safe for everybody.
Do you foresee that the entire, was it 70% or 75?
I think that's yet to be seen because we're not fully filling the hours we could get reimbursed for right now. This position would be primarily the recreational officer to fill those hours. We're hoping 50 to 75% of their time would be through enforcement, training, and the managing of the position. Anything over that, we could use them to backfill overtime shifts, or just be another officer on the road, providing coverage within the county.
Thank you.
Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. I was curious about the jail sheriff, and has there been more incidents overnight, not enough staff, that this position needs to be added?
We've wanted this position for some time. We haven't added any actual staff. We have had some liability issues in the jail. Luckily, we've prevailed due to the training we provide. We're just aware that there is liability there, and it's just like our patrol. The more supervision we have, if it's 24/7, we're reducing that liability. Thankfully, we haven't had any, but I don't think we've had as young a crew on nights as we have had within this last couple of years, based on the amount of people, senior people, resigning.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Mr. Chairman. Well, seeing this as a budget meeting, I guess we should talk dollars a little bit. The position that would be the recreational person, is this something that citations would be issued with fines to be paid? Or and where would Dunn County fall in as far as receiving those fines?
I couldn't tell you the exact percentage of monies we'd receive back from fines. We don't receive a lot back from just general traffic citations. It would be a position that would be issuing citations. It'd be a full enforcement position. Enforcement, obviously, I think would increase based upon the time put into it and the specific knowledge of this position.
I believe that's it.
Well, thank you for your consideration. If anybody has questions, feel free to contact me at any time.
Thank you, Marshall. Dustin.
No.
No.
Craig.
Craig.
Oh, no, sorry.
I'm-
Blue Regatta.
Sorry, I'm looking at the previous draft. My apologies.
Good evening. Human Services has two requests for new positions in front of you this evening. The first request is for an adult protection lead worker. And the second request is for a mental health therapist or a clinician in the department. A little background on the adult protection lead position that we would be asking for and what that person does. The role of the adult protection, or what we call an APS position, that unit receives reports regarding adults or elderly persons that are at risk of abuse or neglect. or that they need services such as guardianship or placement because they're not able to care for themselves any longer or remain in their home for different issues that they may be having. And so when adult protection gets involved, we investigate all of these types of situations, and then there's processes that we follow depending on what their needs are. In this unit, we currently have 2 full-time adult protection staff. And we also add on some duties to the ADRC staff to help with those protective placement numbers because it is just way too much for our current 2 positions in the APS section. The types of cases are the investigation, guardianships, and protective placements, as I said, and the protective placements, once a protective placement is completed, then annually we have to review each of those placements, where that person is located. Is it still appropriate? Is it safe? Is there any other issues? Along with if there's guardianship issues, if they desire a new guardianship, etc. So that's all part of that process. So why do we have a need for this? Why do we need more than 2 staff? Between 2017 and 2022, we've had a 43% increase in referred cases in this unit. And just this year, we have had a 48% increase in the first 6 months of 2023 versus 2022. So you can see our numbers just keep climbing. Why is this? Well, let's look at the graph of older persons nationally, Wisconsin, Dunn County. Our baby boomers are getting older, right? So we have more people in this age category. And so the issues are coming forward with that. And so with the higher numbers means higher reports, more needs in this population. In addition to the number of cases increasing, we are also seeing a lot of co-occurring mental health and substance abuse issues along with aging, normal aging issues such as dementia or physical issues that happen with our bodies as we get older, including me. We won't go there tonight, but I just had a big birthday again. I don't know how that happens, but anyway, I got off topic. So the complexity of cases is tough when you're looking at some mental health issues or substance abuse issues along with the natural aging processes. There's a lot more systems involved. There's a lot more what I call onion layers to peel back and really get at what is the root cause of what's going on? Is it the mental health? Is it the physical? Is it dementia? Those kinds of things. So that takes longer. It takes more assessments. It takes more court time, all of those kinds of things. So there's much more length of involvement in those cases due to the complexity of it. It's a mandated service with very little state money that comes our way. It's very, very small. And this is one of the legislative requests that the county had made this year, this past year, and we've seen just a very minor increase. We don't know how much we're going to get yet, but the state just gave a very small increase. So, that's not going to help us at the level that we really need. So we need additional staff people to handle all these cases, and the lead worker request is because of the number of cases that have increased. We need to have some relief on the manager that's in charge of this program as well, and some of those duties could be given to a lead worker along with the investigative and those kinds of things. So we are requesting that it's a lead position. Any questions regarding the APS position? Okay, then I'm going to take you into the mental health therapist clinician position. This is a position that we would want in our mental health clinic. We currently have 2 positions in the mental health clinic, that is 2 therapist positions. And this position that we're asking for is in the specific need of clinical supervision. So what that means is that when we have programs that have requirements and regulations that we have to abide by, those programs mandate that the therapists that are in those programs have clinical supervision so that they're So somebody's monitoring the therapist and helping them make good decisions and monitoring all of the cases that we're working with and giving recommendation to the therapist and to the workers, even those workers that are not therapists that are working in those programs. And so we have programs that are required through the statutes and regulations to have clinical supervision. And so this person would be able to provide clinical supervision for the staff that are in this unit and monitoring the cases. This would help help with the liability of this as well. Currently, we have one clinical supervisor for all of these programs, and that person is the behavior health supervisor as well. So she is running the clinic, she's running the comprehensive services program and the crisis program, all of those staff, all of the programs and regulations, and she's providing the clinical supervision. It is just too much for her to be continuing to do with the increasing cases and the complex needs that we continue to see. The second portion of this position would be for the family and children's unit. We have families that need clinical support or therapist support that are either at risk for being removed from home or have already been removed from their home, and we're trying to reunify them with families. And so we are working to try to get that clinical support for them. And many times we don't have therapists available within our community to do that. In addition, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we're looking for kind of a one-stop shop for them so that they're not going from here to here to here to here, because they have a lot of things going on in their lives, and sending them to a lot of places just makes things really complicated. So we would like to address that with a clinician in our clinic. I want to give you some stats because when I reviewed these stats, it really stood out to me. Every year, Dunn County schools provide a youth risk behavior survey for the students in high school. And the schools that did it this last year was Menominee, Boyceville, and Colfax schools that we have the data for. One of the slides that really stood out for me is students that considered suicide. This wasn't like, oh, I wonder what that would be like. This is actually attempted or very seriously considered taking their own lives. And you can see here on this chart that those numbers are significant to youth to be able to really think about what that would mean. And some of the students that we're working with, those high risk behaviors, high suicidal impact, would be those children that are either placed out of home just because of all the trauma that's created in that situation or what's happened to them. So they are at very high risk of suicide as well. And then when we look at the next slide, it shows the county data in this survey, which is again the same schools, of students that had reported that they have mental health concerns. And this isn't like, oh, I feel stressed sometimes. This is, I have a diagnosis, I have a mental health concern. And when you correlate that in high school to students and their grades, you'll see that 70% of the students that marked that they have mental health concerns are receiving D's and F's. And, there's some correlation there with the kids that we're serving in our program because of the trauma that's going on. That's, that's very common that those students are the C's and D's. Now, once in a while we have an outliner that may be getting higher grades, but we know when things are going on in children's lives, in their families, it's hard to think about school, right? When they're worried about, am I going to get fed tomorrow? Am I going to be homeless tomorrow? Am I going to see my parent tomorrow? Those kinds of things. It's hard to focus on school. So, those are just a couple data points I wanted to give you because those are the families that we're working with, and providing that good therapist clinical model is very important to help those students. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the one-stop shop. look at this, providing therapy to services to parents who are working with child protection, youth justice, comprehensive community services, and children's long-term care. Those are children with disabilities. Will provide a continuum of care needed to support families. So we're hoping that it reduces placements or it gets children back home sooner, which of course saves money, it saves trauma, all of those kinds of things that are going on. We have the philosophy and strongly believe children belong with their families if it at all can happen safely. And the sooner we can make that happen, the better for the family, as long as that things have been put in place for safety. And so part of that is the clinical work that is being done with the families and the hard work that they're doing. We need help with the clinical supervision, as I explained with that. And I also wanted to address the fact that if we're able to bill any kind of provider type Medicaid, private insurance, or consumer billing, if they have an ability to pay, we do charge people. We do an assessment, a financial assessment that determines how much can you pay towards this bill, and then they're billed that, or the insurances, and we do that. So there is some revenue coming in for these positions, and we base that in our request as to how much revenue would be at that portioned out based on what we do with some of the other clinicians and trying to use those same kind of percentages. So we do have some revenue. It's not 100% tax levy ask for this position. With that, I would entertain any questions that you may have.
Supervisor Vogel.
Thank you. So can I ask a question outside of
Sure.
staffing? So I noticed that revenue was going down 802,000. What happened there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. What happened is that we received a CDBG grant that was for the housing projects. And that was, I'm going to look at Chris, was it 4 years? 2 years?
2.5.
Okay, thank you. This was before my time that started, but so that money came in for revenue, and what happened with that revenue money is the majority of it went out to providers such as Stepping Stone and West Cap that actually provided the services. We kept a little bit back for the staff, like some of my time, some of finance time, but the majority of it came in and went back out. So even though it's an in and out, you're going to see it as a reduction in revenue and a reduction in the expenses in both areas. That was a large amount of that. Great question.
Should it match the operations decrease, or is there actually then an increase in operations?
So let me grab, so I had written that. I didn't have that chart. Okay, thank you. Because I didn't have a copy of that along. Thank you.
This is your decrease of revenue and this is your decrease of expense. So you bought it 200,000.
Yeah, about $200,000 mark there.
Well, that was your family treatment court grant.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, Chris mentioned the family treatment court grant. We did have a reduction in that area, and there was a couple other reductions in grants, not fully stopped, but they were reduced in some areas that helped cover that that money, that
Thank
part
you.
of it. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for your consideration of the two positions. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Paula.
Mhm.
Veteran Services, Greg? Yeah, it's just like making sure that the right document.
Good evening, supervisors. For the Veteran Service Office, our direct ask is to increase a current position that last year we had support to add a program assistant for 1 day a week. And we're requesting to increase that position from 1 day a week to 3 days a week. Currently, that position is working 2 days a week. The other day is being supported by some ARPA funds that we had received from the governor earlier this year. So we're utilizing that position 2 days a week. The overall justification for that position is back August of 2022, Congress had approved the largest overall veterans-related benefit program with implementation of toxic exposure, more robust information and benefits surrounding that, which really gave an overall recognition more than just the defoliant toxic exposure during the Vietnam War, but expanding that to cover our Gulf War veterans that started back in the early 90s up through the present. And also beyond that, it's framed in a way for toxic exposure just because it also will cover firefighters from exposure to some of the firefighting foam, some of these long-standing chemicals, to benzene from fuels. And so we've already seen a lot of incredible outcomes from this new legislation. But what comes with new legislation and increased benefits comes with an increased workload. I don't ask for additional hours lightly. That's why you haven't seen me before requesting this. 1 day a week was the initial ask. We can absolutely support and justify that by the increase in the workload. And so that's where increasing up to 3 days. The reason it's not for more is because there is a significant increase. It's difficult to take on when you're throwing benefits and stuff onto that position. So hoping in the future that we'll get some federal support, which there is legislation that Tammy Baldwin has authored called the CVSO Act to get some federal funds on board. So there is the understanding that there's an increased need, increased hours, and we also have an obligation to serve our Dunn County residents, constituents. More than just the veterans, there's also many dependents. And I can guarantee in here, without speaking too loudly, that everybody in here has been impacted here, even as of late, due to toxic exposure for one of our family. Any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Greg. This time for sure. Come on up, Dustin.
Good evening. The highway department is requesting a engineering tech position to help in our engineering department at highway. This position would account for approximately 89,317 per year in 2024. That would include fiscal benefits and wages. So this position would help the assistant commissioner / engineer position at highway. We do a lot of work for the state, do a lot of work for the county, as well as the towns and other departments. Currently, there's 2 employees, myself and the assistant highway commissioner / engineer, that complete all this work. It's not as simple as going out and breaking ground with our equipment and staff. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of behind the scenes things that happen before a project can get off the ground. So this position would help assist the planning, the coordinating, and the maintenance of construction projects, inspect construction projects, drainage structures and bridges, ensure compliance of plans and specifications, CAD drafting and GIS data, assisting with field surveys for design and construction staking, maintaining proper records and reports, and overseeing and maintaining highway utility access and single trip permits, and also preparing project estimates and reports, and then all other work related to the engineering and highway department. We currently are maxed out. Like I said, I feel that my position as a department head has been taken away from these projects that are ongoing. We do have, I don't know if we can go to a different slide.
Oh, you should have a
I got it.
All right.
So this is the plan of proposed projects for 2024. As you can see, there is 9 projects, and that's duplicated with some bridges there. We have four bridges actually in the process of being replaced. So we do oversee a lot of the town bridges that are in the program for being replaced. So we do sponsor them. So we oversee their bridges and some of their construction projects from start to finish. So that is put on my shoulders as well as the assistant commissioner. So as you can see, like I said, we're having 9 projects proposed for next year. This is above and beyond what we would typically do. But obviously we're all familiar with the BIL funding that has been allocated to transportation. So there is extensive federal and state funding coming to transportation, which creates a bigger workload. We are looking at
Gravity, apparently.
A disaster.
so basically, if what we're looking at, how to pay for some of this. So we basically budget approximately $50,000 annually to engineering services. And that does vary year after year based on our project workload. But on average, I would say it's about $50,000 a year that we budget annually to hire consultants. With this position, we would do a lot of our in-house design that we would not have to hire a consultant. We also do work for the DOT, so there is a potential that some of this wage and benefits would be charged to the DOT, as well as some towns that we do complete work for. Like I said before, I feel like my position is basically trying to get these projects off the ground. The assistant commissioner, he's overloaded with the amount of workload. 2 employees is a very, very difficult task to oversee. As I stated before, $16.4 million worth of construction is what we're anticipating in 2024. So 2 individuals, myself and the assistant commissioner, are basically overseeing that particular workload above and beyond the additional costs to operate the highway department. I just wanted to compare kind of our neighboring counties. As you can see, this is Eau Claire County as of today. They have 69.5 employees at the highway department. We're proposing 53 with this position. So we would have 53 employees with this engineering tech position. As you can see, what makes up the engineering portion of it is myself and the assistant commissioner. Eau Claire County, they have an assistant commissioner, they have a county engineer, engineering tech, and 2 surveyors, or 1 surveyor, I should say. Obviously, we can't compare apples to apples all the time, just with even our neighboring counties. But we have about the same workload as they do annually. Their annual budget is right around that $19 million per year. So they have about the same workload as we do, that we are requesting in 2024. I apologize, this is very hard to see, but this is St. Croix County. 80 plus employees that they have at St. Croix County in the highway department. This does include their fiscal finance employees as well in that 80 employees. But they have an assistant commissioner, an engineer, 2 technicians, county surveyor, and a survey and tech. So obviously that's a big difference than what Dunn County has. Like I said before, it's very difficult to get all these projects off the ground. we work day and night to try to get this going for our staff. There's a lot, like I said, behind the scenes that nobody realizes. We do a lot of the environmental, hazmat, historical, endangered plant and animal screenings, along with DNR permits, plan specs, specifications, and bidding documents for each one of those projects. So myself and one other individual are continually doing that. And like I said before, it does take away from managing the department. If staff have a question, concern, it's very, very difficult to answer their questions and concerns due to the workload. I feel it's a huge benefit. It could be a very efficient position to help with highway. I guess.
You want to reiterate where we sit in terms of distance of roads?
Yeah, so Dunn County has 425 miles of roads, which is the 7th most out of 72 counties that we maintain on the county system. And a lot of this other stuff is, I didn't know what was all going to be presented to you tonight, so I was putting it on my slides just to what maintenance and all that. But I just wanted to let you know, like I said, that's what we deal with is we actually maintain more roads than Eau Claire County. I'm not saying we do more than St. Croix because they have more state system that they maintain than we do, but and they do maintain 17 of the 21 towns in St. Croix County. That's why their staff is a lot larger. But the engineering side, like I said, they have, it's not, we're lacking in that field. And it's, like I said, to retain individuals, it is a lot of work on myself as well as the assistant commissioner to try to get this accomplished and done. And we have a very good employee as the assistant commissioner right now, and I'd like to keep that individual. He is a PE, he is got design experience, and we want to bring that to our highway department where we can do internal designs and engineering services internally instead of outsourcing it.
Is a FIAD teacher?
A PE, yes, FIAD. Professional engineer. I guess any questions? I don't know if I'm rambling or summed it up perfectly.
Supervisor Lino.
You had mentioned, Dustin, regarding the outside contractor, the budget around $50,000 a year for that. Of that 50,000, if we have this position available to the highway department, would there be any incident then to have an outside contractor, or that would be 50,000 to the good for us?
So basically what the 50,000 that we allocate would be to design that we could do internally. So there is times where we will have to hire a consultant. If we have a project that has state or federal grant money to it,
Okay.
we have to outsource that. That goes through the DOT process, and a consultant is required to design that. This position would help for any type of local designs that do not have state or federal funding involved with it.
But generally that state or federal funding would, kind of have an earmark, so to speak,
Yes.
for that contracting.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty simple.
You talk about projects?
As
Yeah.
you want me to? Okay.
Yeah, can I just give a little bit of background?
I guess I can, because I can turn on my microphone and talk.
Okay, so I'm just gonna send you back to this document, to the top part of it that talks about the highway projects county force, where our staff are doing the projects of $2.1 million. And again, these are rounded numbers, and then the highway projects that are state matched. And on this slide that Dustin has up, The green ones are the county force ones, the $2.1 million ones. And the yellow ones are the state match ones. And I would note that that includes, if you look right in the center, the two county B projects are currently, the county's portion is $1.6 million and $3 million. And we will carry forward anticipate carrying forward $2.7 million towards those projects, but it leaves about $2 million uncovered, which is the increased cost of, since they were costed out. Am I saying that right?
Correct.
It costs us now $2 million more to do those projects. So when, if you did all the fancy math and you took those totals of what they cost and what we have to carry forward, you end up with these two dollar amounts. So if you want to just talk to the projects.
Okay.
Now you can't talk. Yeah, so like Chris mentioned, obviously this is what the proposed 2024 construction plan would be. Obviously the green are the county projects that county employees would be completing. So that has basically no state or federal funding. I take that back. There is some state funding involved, but it is not a project that needs to be contracted out. So the ones in yellow are contracted projects. So that has federal dollars involved with it. Typically, those type of projects can vary between an 80-20 match or 100% or vice versa. As you can see, the big portion of next year's proposed budget at Highway is the County Road B project. This project is from 1229 to I-94. That is one project. That has 80% match federal dollars allocated to that project. So the Dunn County is on the hook for 20% of that overall cost. So as you can see, that's that $1.6 million of the overall estimated cost, which is approximately $8 million to complete that portion from 1229 to I-94. That is a contracted job with 80% funds. The other portion of County Road B is from I-94 to Packer Drive. I'm sure we're all familiar with how rough that is. The railroad tracks are just in disbelief. That is estimated currently at $4 million. With that project, there's a $1 million reimbursement once the project is complete. This was part of the multimodal funding source that happened in 2020, I believe it was. So it's been a project that's been ongoing for a very long time. These two projects were supposed to happen this year. Unfortunately, due to some issues that we had with the railroad, and if you want to see a lot of power, deal with the railroad. They have a lot of authority. So that project, these projects were supposed to happen this year. Unfortunately, we had to delay them. Due to the delay, we have seen approximately 20 to 30% increase just from last year to this year based on those estimated costs. The price of concrete has skyrocketed. We are in a pattern of being, it's a difficult process to even get cement to make up concrete at times. They are rationing it to do these type of projects. We are hopeful that these estimated costs are high. This project could come in lower. We do not know this, but right now, this is based on the engineer's estimate. Those two projects are being let here through the state's process in early November of this year. So we will know more information on what those actual costs will be.
Could you just speak
Oh.
to County B North, because I think people get confused about where the segments you're talking about and the segment that you just did.
Yeah, so County Road B North was what we call this, is from I-94 to Packer Drive, which is just north of the railroad tracks. Project that we are currently doing now in 2023 is from Packer Drive to Double B. So that's the whole segments there. It's split into basically three portions right now. Is currently being done on the very north end, and then obviously these two are next year. Of the overall total cost, obviously, we have $16.4 million worth of projects. 59% of it is federal or state funding. So local match is, we have approximately 40% of the overall total cost to pay for. Which is obviously a very large number based on $16.4 million. It leaves it at about 7.5 million.
Dustin, just a Supervisor Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dustin, I understand that lights will be installed at that intersection, and also the railroad crossing is going to be updated. So who's paying the bill for that?
So the traffic signal lights at the intersection is local. So the county is to pay for that. A portion of the railroad upgrades is we're required to pay 9% of the overall total cost of the upgrade. And that's the surface portion. There is one overhead mast that is required for us to pay for. And this was basically the Commissioner of Railroads. The state of Wisconsin has a Commissioner of Railroads that is a judge that basically is in between the Union Pacific Railroad, which that is the entity that's out there, as well as the DOT. So they basically make a ruling on who pays for what. So the overall cost is, I believe we have to pay, I believe it was just over $100,000 for the actual railroad portion of the entire project cost.
I guess my second part of the question is the highway running west from where the lights are, that's in the city, isn't it?
Correct.
Do they have any cost involved here?
They do not.
And thank you. Well, no, thank you, but thank you.
I am looking at and trying to come up with an agreement with the city on those traffic signals at 3M as well as Badger Drive. So who maintains what and at what cost? That's going to be put into place in the future here.
That looks like it. Thank you, Dustin.
All right, you have been sitting for a long time. Do you want to take maybe a 5-minute break, or do you want to keep slogging through? I'd say we have about half an hour left to go.
Push through.
You gonna keep going? All right. Okay, here comes the fun stuff. This is where we're gonna put you to work a little bit. So we are gonna so you've learned about sort of the overall financial picture of the county. In big terms, you've learned about how our budget is funded and what those funding requests are. You've seen that for a bulk of the departments, the main source of their additional request is salary related. And that kind of, if you address one part of it, you address all of it. You're not going to address any of it per se tonight, but so that $6.7 million. So let me just say a little teaser to the executive committee meeting coming up here in a couple of weeks. We believe, because of how hot the labor market is and because of how looking at our trending for how we have budgeted salary and fringe benefits over the last really 10 years, but certainly over the last 5 years. Over the last 10 years, we've always had more money budgeted than we've actually spent in salary and fringes because of turnover. In the last 5 years, that's been a fairly significant amount more because of all of the turnover. And again, speaking to the earlier question about when someone leaves and they're in a higher wage status, and then you hire in, there's always a little bit of savings in those turnovers. There's savings when positions sit vacant. Well, there's a process of being hiring for those, and sometimes that process can take a long time to recruit qualified candidates for those positions. So all of that said and done, we believe that we can cover, and when I say we have a small internal budget committee comprised of Dan Dunbar and Sarah Stabino, Beata Haug, Andrew, myself, Jenna, Nutter, that look at these numbers often and all day long sometimes. And we believe that we can cover the salary increases and the new positions with essentially our wage variance, that difference between what we budget for and what we actually end up spending. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make decisions about those things. It just means that we think that those can, in a sense, come off the table because we have a funding source for them. But again, you're in the position of deciding about new positions and about salary increases. So those decisions are all still on the table, but we believe that we can cover those costs with that amount, the difference between what's budgeted and what we've actually expended. So the rest of it is, well, what do we do with that? So we're going to walk through an exercise, and we're going to split up the room into 4 groups. I have 4 people that are going to help us to facilitate. Dan, Jenna, Beata, and Andrew are each going to assist with one of the 4 groups. And we're going to walk through an exercise that looks at the potential funding mechanisms and the pros and cons of using each. And so those would include the use of short-term borrowing. So if you recall, I believe there's a slide. Oh, I've got my own slide thingy. Okay, if you recall, short-term borrowing is a mechanism that we can use where we essentially borrow the money at the very end of this year and then pay it back at the very beginning of next year, and then collect the increased taxes for that borrow, which don't go against our levy limit. So that's one tool. So I'm going to ask you to evaluate the pros and the cons of short-term borrowing. And then last question for each of the funding areas will be, is there consensus in your group about whether that particular tool, in this case, short-term borrowing, should be something that we should utilize or suggest utilizing to balance our budget? So if your group kind of by consensus does not think that short-term borrowing should be used, then your answer to that question would be no. If you think that it's a potential tool to be used, then your answer to that question would be yes. So short-term borrowing is one option. Long-term borrowing decided on an annual basis is a second option. So that would mean you're not making any commitment to borrowing year after year. You're just making a commitment to using longer term debt for 1 year at a time, however much you decide that you need to do that for. And again, you use debt to pay for one-time purchases or projects. So in this particular case, we wouldn't use it to cover salary and fringe benefits. We wouldn't use it to cover new positions because those are ongoing costs. We wouldn't use it to cover operational increases that are just ongoing, but we would use it to cover operational increases that were new things or the projects for the highway department. So you have short-term debt, long-term debt as needed. You can make a decision about and some of your predecessors made a decision a number of years ago to utilize long-term debt saying we will borrow up to $3 million a year for X number of years in order to meet those budget needs. And so the second long-term debt question is regarding long-term debt on a set or a defined basis up to a certain amount for a certain number of years. And then the last option that you have for funding is the use of some of our operating reserves or our fund balance. And what are the pros and the cons of using that? And then, and you will have that come to you as a board, as an ordinance, potential ordinance change to implement a fund balance policy if you choose to adopt that in September. But it would be helpful, I think, to work through the pros and the cons of that before you get to that vote in the September's meeting. Again, at the end of each of those questions, there will be a sort of, does your group have any consensus about whether or not those are things that we should consider? So the way that I've said it is if 90% of the county board believes that we should never use short-term borrowing, then it doesn't pay for us to come to you with a proposal to use short-term borrowing. And part of the goal of this exercise is a little bit of getting you to hear each other around what, because we aren't always able to consider all of the good reasons why we do or don't do something. So it's an opportunity for you to hear each other and weighing out the pros and the cons of each of these funding mechanisms. And the second thing is for us to give every opportunity for you to fully understand those pros and cons so that we can come to you with a plan that's doable. And again, our ultimate goal would be that by our October meeting, when we have to publish our budget, that we would have everyone in agreement about how our budget was going to be financed for 2024. If you recall last year, we got to our budget meeting and there was not agreement about the use of borrowing. And I'll just be candid to say we're trying to avoid having that happen again. Not that we have to borrow money, but that we don't have that discussion on the night that the budget's being passed and that we've provided ample opportunity to address those concerns that people may have ahead of time. So with that, I'm going to call my 4 facilitators up and we are going to split this group. So we're going to take, this particular group is 6 and 7, 13 individuals. So let's take the 4 of you, Hillary and Corley, and go this way. And then the group of you and go that way. From there, Carl on over that, go that way. And you can just turn your chairs around and work from kind of back to back. And then over here, let's do the same thing. Let's go Gary Steen and over this way and Larry Bjork and over this way in that group. And then the other group can turn around. And I'm sorry, I don't have a great mechanism for involving our online participants. But we're going to take about 20, we'll shoot for 20 minutes to get through some of this and we'll see where we're at. All right, if you guys can pull yourselves back into your main spots. You could.
I think they got it.
Got it. We can, yep. Okay, so let's just do, I'm sorry. It was a bit of an experiment to see how it worked to do something like this with you. And one of the pros, as long as you're dealing with pros and cons, was it really gives you an opportunity to talk to each other, which you don't automatically get that opportunity, except like in your committee meetings. So I like that I heard a lot of conversation and a lot of people trying to understand and some of these more complex processes. So let's just run through these. We didn't have time to really sort them out, but let's just talk about the outcomes to this in no particular order. And then if you have something else that you automatically stands out for you as a pro or a con, you can just kind of call it out. So we have use of fund balance for one-time purchases and capital improvements. So the pros are we have the money. It may be helpful for one-time projects. We have a healthy fund balance. Again, these might be duplicative. The fund needs controls. I'd say that might be a pro or a con, but we need to figure that out. No, and there's no tax increase by using our fund balance. And the cons would be, it only works if you have a healthy fund balance. It could affect our credit rating. There's fear of a loss of those dollars being spent. We lose interest from investments. Once it's gone, it's gone. It limits emerging needs. There's another one on interest. It's not updated until the next year, late in the next year. So as you know, we're waiting for our fund balance numbers for last year, yet this year. And there's less for a rainy day and uses interest. So again, that idea that we're earning interest income on those numbers. Anything else that anyone wants to share that automatically comes to mind around using fund balance to fund some of our gap? So a little, it's not, it sounds like it should be a straightforward question, and it sort of is, but it's kind of not. So we have long-term investments of about just under $7 million that are like tied up we can get them, but they're tied into things that earn interest out over the next several years. And then we have short-term money held in what's called LGIP, the local government, or Sophia, investment program. And those right now are earning about 5%. Oh, you want the dollar amount? So right now, I think we're earning about $25,000 to $30,000 a month on our LGIP. And I would say, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I'm just going to say at least that on the long term part. So we're earning about, I think I figured out when we did the presentation a couple of months ago, was anticipated to be right around that $500,000 mark for this year.
Okay.
For everything that's in them.
So $500,000 essentially would be free money that wouldn't damage our short-term total. Okay. A thought.
Okay. Anything else that immediately comes to mind around fund balance? Okay. Set long-term borrowing, committing a certain amount every year for so many years that you're going to borrow. So the pros are we're in a good financial position. It allows us some inflation control. We are within our borrowing limits. We can consolidate. Oh, I don't know what that means. Consulate payments will be appealing to credit rating. I don't know what that means. We have a healthy fund balance. I don't know, 1 to 3 million. I don't know what that meant. Keeps property taxes even and
actually going down if you use set long-term borrowing. So again, it's that intersect between we pay off about $5 million a year, and if you're borrowing 3, sort of the trade-off of some version of that. Cons are it can get out of control, raises your tax, could raise your taxes. We have unknown interest rates, takes long-term planning, tempting to spend more than is needed. Anything else that comes to mind when you think about borrowing long-term? Okay. Long-term borrowing needed on an annual basis. Again, we have a good financial position. We have a good credit rating. It's planful. Can be planful, I guess. Better interest rates for long-term needs. Pay more for more expensive projects. Lower interest rates than short-term borrowing. More frequent review discussion. Oh, it needs more frequent review and discussion every year. And the cons are the economic climate is unknown. It could potentially increases taxes or increases taxes. A long-term commitment to a tax increase. Harder to plan long-term and cut cost services. So I think this is just, I just said, I was telling this group over here, the con or a pro, I don't know, wherever you want to put it. One of the outcomes to borrowing is if you choose not to borrow, we can't do all the things. I mean, we have to make then some hard choices about that $6.7 million because that's the gap at this point in time. So we can't cut $6.7 million without that being pretty painful. Okay, short-term borrowing, where we borrow, again, I explained this to one of the groups. We went over this, I think with the CIP workshop. This is where we would borrow a certain amount of money at the end of this year. Say, I think we did a run on like $500,000 at the end of this year. We would pay it back at the very beginning of next year. So we'd only be paying interest on it for a few weeks, and then we would collect the taxes over the year. So it does potentially raise the tax rate for that year, but it's paid off within a year. So the pros are, we have the money, we get the money now. There's limited interest paid out. It only raises taxes for 1 year. It's timely. Work, generate dollars. Or will generate dollars. And pro mechanism for circumventing the levy limit. All borrowing is above the levy limit. We can pay it off faster. It's a good deal for goods, one-time goods can't read that, not holding back something.
Yes, not holding back future boards.
Not holding back future boards. Okay, so this is only committing to this board. One and done, not ongoing. And the cons are, it does potentially raise taxes or raises taxes. I think that's the same thing. It could become a habit, becomes a habit, was a couple of different people. It's bad PR. There are limited dollar amounts that you would want to borrow to do that, I'm assuming. You can't use it for wages. It raises taxes, increases taxes, higher interest rate than other long-term debt was a question mark, and increases taxes. Long-term planning doesn't happen. It causes a variance in the tax rate. So some similar things. Anything else that you can think of with regard to short-term borrowing? Ms. Christine?
Yeah, I got a complaint.
Yeah.
Dan said that we should funnel all borrowing towards the IT department, and I disagree with that.
You know, it was questionable whether we should have Dan be a facilitator or not, and apparently that was true. We shouldn't. Okay. Do you think that in your group, and I'll just let anybody sort of answer this. Do you think in your group there was a sort of a more of a propensity or less of a propensity to use fund balance? Were people kind of open to that, or it's like, take it off the plate, off the table.
Group A had votes for the general fund. That's my group.
Jenna?
I don't know if we were A, B, or C. Or
I don't know
D.
either.
Okay, J for Jenna. There was overall consensus on considering use of the fund balance for one-time projects.
I guess that makes me group D.
It does.
About the pattern. Our group was in favor of the use of fund balance. I would say strongly, most strong. That's a word.
And Beata, Group B?
Recall that our group, we had more disadvantage or cons of using fund balance than we did as an advantage of using fund balance. So to answer that question, I would lean towards not using the fund balance. Am I correct?
All right, fair enough. I mean, this is like a, it's not even a straw poll. I don't even know what this is, but just, it's not official voting. Yes, it's just really just trying to get a sort of a read. So you hear kind of how the other groups thought. How about, let's just talk about short-term borrowing and long-term, or let's talk about long-term borrowing. Just kind of the belly for borrowing in general on a long-term basis. Yes, no,
Group A found advantages in both long-term borrowing as well as set long-term borrowing.
Yeah, I have the microphone on. Group D, I would say as it relates to all of the borrowing, I think there was a general consensus of have a good plan and we know what we're doing with with that. With also understanding the tax impacts of each of the options.
how that impacts the tax, the mill rate, the tax rate. Okay. Jenna?
There was a lot of discussion on long-term borrowing being set versus annual with regard to how that impacts the interest rate. Can you help us understand that more?
So the variable in, there really wouldn't be, because if you're saying we're gonna borrow, I'm just gonna say $1 million, we're gonna borrow $1 million a year, every year for the next 5 years, or we're just gonna make that decision as we go, we still have to go out and issue bond, and that'll be dependent on the interest rates at the time. Now,
Would that
if you, yeah, because we're not gonna borrow, like, we're not gonna say, well, we're gonna borrow $1 million a year for the next 5 years and then borrow all 5 million of it in year one. So I don't think it matters.
Some consensus on long-term borrowing for the appropriate expenses.
Beata, did your group have a?
Our team, the discussions around the benefits of short-term, long-term relative to the interest rates. You know, what does that mean? Are we saving money? Or if we, I'm trying to recall, we were, so I think there was, I felt like there is an equal possibility of using one or the other or both.
Okay. So can I just float one more hypothesis and then I promise that we will be done. Can I say that what I'm hearing is there was at least some appetite for looking at fund balance, and you're going to have an opportunity to weigh in on that here in September when we look at the fund balance policy, and that'll kind of give you a chance to really, now maybe you understand a little bit more of the pros and the cons of that. So there's maybe some appetite for that. But when it comes to borrowing, what you really want to know in order to make that is what is the impact on the taxpayer? Is that fair? Okay. Okay. So it's not, can I put one other words in your mouth? It's not an absolute no. You're just looking for, you're not, can I just say you're looking to not increase taxes? There? There? Okay. Okay. So some people feel that way and some people feel like a potential tax increase is potentially okay.
Group A had a pioneering effort led by a certain supervisor who shall remain nameless, but it sounds like Shore Mouse. to do a potential combination of all four.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just more of trying to decide, like I say, we don't want to go super far down a path because it takes a lot of time to nuance all these numbers, go super far down a path that nobody is interested in. So if we know that they're all there are cautions around them, but you'll at least consider them if we can provide you the information regarding the cautions. That's about the best we're going to do out of something like this.
Yeah, Chris, I might suggest that on the tax question, it's people are willing to have an impact on the tax rate if they feel it is justified for the individual projects, and then how that impacts different people is going to vary a lot. That's what I was hearing.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so next steps,
Supervisor Steen.
I can wait till for the next steps.
Okay. Next steps, executive committee. So we have this $6.7 million gap. Just the easiest way to say it. We will come to the executive committee in September to drill more into that. And as well as to then begin to offer options for how that gap gets filled, utilizing these tools or cuts or a different salary and salary rate or kind of all of the above. So if you want to talk about that, you have really strong thoughts about all of that, I'm really glad to hear them. And please either sign up today or call me and find a time and we'll just sit down and put our heads together and see what we can come up with. But the executive committee will meet on September 13th at 3:30. And again, those meetings are recorded and usually out a day or two after the meeting. If you want to hear that, but if you want to hear the discussion, you're certainly welcome to attend. It's here. And then we will come back in September to the county board meeting with sort of how far we've gotten to that date. And then with the goal of coming in October, there'll be an executive committee meeting in October and a county board meeting in October, and coming and saying, how, sort of like, this is where we're at and this is the plan, and can people support this plan when we come to a vote in November? Fair enough. Any last minute questions?
Supervisor Steen.
No questions. But I would like to thank the chairman and our management team for making a concerted effort to try to make this process more understandable for the average board member. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, and I welcome your feedback as well about ways we can improve it. As you can see, this is always a work in process. And I'm trying to find ways for you to be more involved in feeling like you have a say in the direction that we're all going. So, with that, I think.
Supervisors on.
I just wanted to echo what Supervisor Steen said. This was really helpful. Thought the workshop thing was good. And then I had a question for Nick. No, I'm just kidding because I saw you turn your mic off. I just wanted to give you a hard time. That's all.
Yeah, I too. Mr. Chairman?
Oh, sorry, Don, just a minute. Okay, you go first. Supervisor Keeter.
Oh, okay, thank you. Just one question. What is say roughly the current interest rate on short-term borrowing?
I don't have any idea, but we will find it out.
We will get you that answer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Supervisor Thomas.
Yeah,
Thank you.
here.
I too echo that this has been very helpful, especially as a newer member and learning this process. I guess I do have one question about process, and that is that the next step this is going to take is executive committee, then come to us after that, correct? As an entire
Yep,
board.
so it goes to executive committee over September and October.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
you ultimately, as the board, make the final decision in November.
Yeah, okay.
And let me thank staff for all of this. I will take no credit. I just didn't say no.
And I believe that Dan's got an announcement. It's very, very exciting.
You know what it is?
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know you're going to be receiving an email from me maybe tomorrow. We are migrating county email from Google to Microsoft. So we are going to be looking to schedule times with you, each of you, to come in, meet with us, and get everything set up so that you can log into that system, get your county laptops, which we're gonna hopefully make a lot easier for you to use your county laptop to access your county email. So just letting you know, expect that email. Please sign up. We're hoping to get everything done by the beginning of October. And we can't do 29 people at the same time. So we're just looking for you to schedule a time. So there'll be a link in there where you pick a time and we can help you, but we are going to need you in person to do that. So great question. We're scheduling the staff for an hour. I don't expect it to go that long. It depends on kind of how, if you have a phone, there's a little bit of time to be able to set up to check county email on your phone and to do different things. It could take as little as 15 minutes. We could sit and just chit chat for an hour. So, but yeah, but we're scheduling in 1 hour blocks.
Okay, and I've got two announcements. One is I will be sending out that link for surveys after Dan has settled all of your emails down. So that'll come out, and just, you know, what your experience on the board is, what you would like people to know about your committees. If you're a chair, what you would like people to know about being chair in that committee. We're trying to create onboarding so that next time around, new supervisors have a little bit more information when they try to hit the ground running, and then there's a little bit less chasing after the bus. And then the other one is the next county board meeting will be Wednesday, September 20th, 2023 at 7 p.m. And with that, we are adjourned.
I need
Oh,
to see
wait.
Supervisor Steen, Headland, Zons, Vogel, Morehouse, Prochnow, Calabrese, Kinnear, and Quinn. Up
That
here,
would be the
please.
exec committee.
Yes.